What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 126 of the FlipScreen Games Podcast, a weekly video game podcast where two best buds from different nations come together to discuss the wide, wide world of video games. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined as always by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Stephen Radford.
Hello, hello.
I had a little bit of a Harley Quinn thing going, Mista instead of, but welcome back to the show, buddy.
Yeah, it's good to be back. A good week, it seems. Well, for some people, maybe a good week. I don't
I
know
would say
about
it's a good week
everybody.
of conversation. I think
Yeah, yeah, good conversation. Yeah.
whether or not it's a good week of news, I guess, is in the eye of the fanboy. But yeah, I mean, we're let's not bury the lead, right? It's been a tough couple weeks for the Xbox faithful, right? I think if you are an Xbox fan, or a fanboy, maybe, or if you're comfortable with that term, right? If you're deep in the trenches on the Xbox side of the console wars, you're probably upset this week. So we're going to talk you through it. And if you're a PlayStation person on the opposite side of that war, you're probably doing a victory lap. So, I guess you can take this like we're, whatever. This is for everybody, right? We're not taking sides here today. But we're going to talk
hmm
about the news because of course there a slew of rumors the last couple of weeks that then led to some leaks, which led to some more rumors that Xbox is taking several of its high profile exclusive games multi platform, whether that's on Nintendo Switch or I think more controversially, PlayStation 5, right? So that also comes off the heels of a story that has been developing for the last few months since fall of last year that Xbox games are getting removed from physical retailers like Walmart as well.
hmm
So a lot of, I think confusion and maybe even some anger, right? From a lot of the Xbox community about what's happening. And is this Xbox throwing in the towel? Does this mean they're going third party? Does this mean it's the end of the box, right? And, I think I want to sift through some of that, separate some of the fact from fiction, and then you and I can talk about Xbox's half response, what we think we'll hear from them next week, and where we go from here. So I want to catch folks up if they haven't been following along. How's that sound to you, Steve?
Sounds good. I think it makes sense. There's been a lot of changes over the last few days, I would say.
Yeah. So if you've not been keeping up at home, the last we'll say the last month, right? There's been a number of rumors that have kind of come up and then continued to come up, right? That a few of Microsoft's first party games, specifically originally Hi-Fi Rush and Sea of Thieves, would be coming out on other platforms, right? There was a leak of data mined assets for Hi-Fi Rush that pointed to a release of that game on PlayStation 5 and on Nintendo Switch. And then there was, a rumor that, you would see Sea of Thieves follow suit, right? And that it was also going to be coming to those non Xbox platforms. I think specifically PlayStation on that one. But then there was another report that started making the rounds that sources connected to The Verge were saying that upcoming games like Indiana Jones were being considered for release on PlayStation 5, right? And that obviously created a lot of conversation and I think
hmm
kind of started snowballing this story a little bit more. And then we got another report that I think put it on a lot of people's maps, right? This week, which was from Xbox Era, that claimed that sources, that were willing to speak on the condition of anonymity, told them that Microsoft had plans to bring Starfield to PlayStation 5 and that it was going to come, quote, post the release of the already announced Shattered Space expansion for Xbox and PC, which is on target to arrive at some point later this year. So, if that's the case, that would mean either theoretically Starfield comes out late this year or early next year, depending, I guess, on the timing of the DLC, but, pretty
Same
imminently.
same deal with Indiana Jones, right? Because The Verge was saying that they're targeting December 2024 for the Xbox release, and then potentially it'll be 6 to 12 months later on PlayStation.
Right. Yeah, and I guess ultimately not too dissimilar than what we've seen with PlayStation and PC, right? Where it's you kind of get that initial exclusivity on Game Pass and on, the Xbox platform, and it's out on PC, and then gradually it makes its way to the other platforms where it makes sense
Mhm.
for it to be sold as a full price product, right? Um, not not necessarily like unprecedented or unheard of, but certainly something I think surprising, right, to a lot of Xbox fans and to a lot of people that think of things in kind of the traditional console war mentality, right? That like, of course, you would never put your exclusive stuff on the other box. And I mean, yeah, it's there's some more details here, but let's talk about this a little bit, Steve. What do you make of this? Are you
I mean,
surprised by this?
somewhat, I think. I mean, Hi-Fi Rush made sense to me. It felt like the kind of game that would end up on Switch. To bring
I guess
it to
it's only
PlayStation
weird
was
because they
maybe a
own
little
the studio,
surprising.
right? Because it's like Cuphead came, Ori came, those are
Yeah.
Xbox games, but they don't own those studios, and it felt a little bit more like understandable, right? Whereas this
Mhm.
is straight up and down a Tango Gameworks is an Xbox owned, I mean, it's Bethesda, right? But, it's an Xbox game studio,
Yeah. Sea of Thieves, I think, also makes sense. It's a multiplayer game.
right?
Makes sense to be on as many platforms as possible to keep that community thriving. You bring
Especially
in
this
new
many
people
years in,
from
right? It's been around a long
exactly.
time. Getting new servers on PlayStation will breathe new life into the game. It makes sense. Makes sense. Same way that you didn't question it as much when like Minecraft was like, "Oh yeah, we're going to keep it multi-platform." It's like, yeah, of
Exactly,
course,
yeah.
right?
And well, Call of Duty, there was no question, right, that it was
Right.
gonna stay on all platforms when, Xbox bought them. I also think it's interesting that the other 2 games that have been discussed are Bethesda games or ZeniMax games, and that we're not hearing any internal games, at least I mean, there are some,
Yeah.
right, that
Yeah.
potentially
Let me
are
get here.
GA.
Let me pull a pin out of that one, Steve. I'll keep going because in addition to this report from the Starfield bit from Xbox era, right? They've also heard that Microsoft have made additional investment into PlayStation 5 dev kits to support ongoing development efforts, adding further fuel to the fire.
I mean, that
Direct
could
quote.
what I mean, what if it's we're investing in no, but, like, what if we're investing in it for the Call of Duty stuff that we are legally obligated
Yep.
to do,
Yeah. And
or
and
new Minecraft games?
and here's the thing. Maybe that would be the case, Steve, but somehow that's not all because we got another rumor of a major Xbox IP coming to PlayStation specifically in this case, which this rumor comes from Jeff Grubb, who was doing his Game Mess morning show, and he said that Gears of War is another one of the games that they are considering bringing to PlayStation. That, of course, is a first party game, is a capital X Xbox game, right? That's one of their marquee old school franchises, right, of the last couple generations. Granted, they bought it from Epic, but that's how they do. And so I'll read what Jeff said. Let me see. The other one that I've heard that's definitely under consideration, it doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's in talks, is Gears of War. Gears of War is being considered for this. And he also
Honestly,
said,
why does anyone care at this point? Like, it's like, what? They haven't released a Gears of War game for, like, 10 years?
"Oh, what? There was Gears 6 came out in what, 2020, right?"
Did it? Was it
Yeah.
2020?
Yeah, it's not that old.
No, it's not even out yet. Gears 6
Oh,
teased for
Gears 5.
2024.
When was Gears 5?
Gears 5, yeah, 2019, you're
Yeah,
right. The
not that long.
Coalition.
That's like a normal dev cycle, 6 years
Yeah,
between games.
I
I'm not
guess.
I'm not gonna sit here and say that Gears
I
hasn't
mean, it's
lost,
an Xbox One game, so, like, it's an old ass game,
I mean, it was it
really. Like
was it was like an end of last generation
yeah, I
release,
guess so, yeah.
you know? Funny for you to say that's an old ass game when we're sitting here, everybody's talking about, is it too
No,
soon
but
to
consider,
re-release
like
The Last of Us Part 2 from Steve's mouth? That's an
mm,
old ass game.
but consider, like, Hi-Fi Rush, Indiana Jones,
Yeah, yeah.
Starfield, those are modern, current gen titles.
Well, I
To go
mean,
back and port over Gears, I mean, maybe
you
they're
think it's
doing
the old
that
one
because
though?
it's
It
it
could
could
be
be
the
that it's
new
like
one that you just said, right? Gear 6 is
oh, yeah,
supposed to come
it
out
could be Gear 6 that they're gonna release that. Yeah, I guess you're
flat.
right.
And then maybe you do, like, a collection of, like, some of the ones that never came out on
They're on Unreal
PlayStation.
Engine, so it would make sense. You could easily port that over, and there's even been that leaked port of, Gears running on PlayStation that
On
Epic was
PS3 before
playing
it was
with.
bought.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
So it's like, it's obviously,
It's definitely possible.
yeah, right, why not? And, like, that is, I think, similar to what we said about Sea of Thieves, though, right? Is like, I could see you making a Gears collection and then the new Gears game that are all on PlayStation, and they're new games for that audience, you know?
Mhm,
I mean, obviously, I think Gears has kinda lost a step. I don't think it's nearly as much of a, there was a point where it was a marquee title, right? Back on the Xbox 360 days at kind of the height of the
yeah,
FPS
same as
craze.
Halo, it was on the same level.
Yeah. It was like the Pepsi to Halo's Coke, right? And Xbox owned them both, and that was a big deal. I remember the whole "throw smoke," like, it was a moment, right? For sure. I think that moment's kind of past, but
Mhm.
I thought that about God of War, right? So it's not possible for them to reinvent it. And maybe bringing it to PlayStation, getting in front of more gamers, and having, like, a big release with 6 that you know, maybe it plays on nostalgia in some way. Maybe it's kind of like a,
Mhm.
a reboot or an end to that story, or, like, I think there's ways you could breathe new life into it, and bringing it to a new platform could be a way to kind of, drum up that interest again, if they are concerned about the health of that IP, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can get people excited for the IP. Maybe it shouldn't be called Gear 6. Maybe it should be a complete reinvention if that's what they're concerned about. It seems like though it's more money, left on the table, right? And
Yeah.
they worry that they've just got this huge audience over on the PlayStation side that they're not tapping into. And I do think, there probably is some concern there from a business perspective. And you've got Game Pass cannibalizing all of your first party sales on your platform. Game Pass is not on PlayStation. I don't think it ever will be. It
No.
makes sense in my mind. I can see why consumers would be pissed off. You've invested in Xbox, your box potentially is you don't need it anymore. Maybe you invested in the wrong one because you wanted Starfield, but now Starfield's coming to PlayStation. You could have bought a PlayStation instead and had all of those other games and also played Starfield. So I can see why people would be annoyed in
Or
that
I think,
regard.
yeah, like we were talking about, there are a lot of people that still are very, like, bought in onto the console war thing, right? And that are they call,
Mhm.
you're an Xbox, you're a Sony pony, right? And it's like there is that, like, that is real, right? And, I don't think it matters. I'm not that kind of person. I own all the boxes. I don't care. I've always owned them all. Um the privilege of not having any siblings or playing sports. And, yeah, so to me, like, that has always been, like, a marketing thing that I never quite understood why, like, consumers bought in on, but, like, I mean, I don't know, in the 3rd generation, or not the 3rd generation, the PS3, Xbox 360 generation, 7th generation, I didn't own a PS3 because I was not able to afford one, and I
You're
definitely bought.
woke, Pete. You should have got a second job. Come on.
Yeah,
Come on.
well, I just got the first one back then, and, I was, I remember my friends and I talking smack about the PlayStation because we were justifying to ourselves that the one that we could afford was better, right? And, like,
I
that
mean, I
was.
think it was objectively better anyway. Like the 360, I think, was a better console. If it wasn't for the Red Ring of Death, I think it would have
Yeah.
completely won out that generation.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, I think the PlayStation 3 has a really underrated library, though. Like, I think that, like, there are a lot of third-party games that you associate with Xbox because they were more popular there, but a lot of them were available on PS3, and there was a bunch of really cool exclusives,
Mhm.
but,
Eventually, though, like there was a lot of timed exclusive things like BioShock came to
sure.
Xbox before
I'm even talking
you
about, like,
had.
the first-party stuff, though, right? Like, you have stuff like, like the Resistance trilogy and Infamous, and that's where Uncharted started. You got The Last
Yeah,
of
but is
Us,
the
like,
Resistance or Infamous as good as Halo or Gears of War?
Eye of the Beholder, I guess, right? I would say probably not, but that doesn't mean that they're not good or worth playing, right?
Mhm. You're
It's
a big
just
Killzone fan, famously.
famously a big Killzone guy, yeah. Uh, so, just to put a pin on this before I throw to you for some more opinions, Steve. Uh, you kinda teased this in the Xbox, what is it? Sorry, Xbox Era. I almost said Xbox Wire, report. They talked a little bit about kind of the internal decision making that led to this, and that there is reportedly some discontent among some of the decision makers near the top of Xbox, and that this wasn't necessarily a path that was totally agreed on, right? Obviously, they came to this conclusion, but um, let me pull back from the article, right? As the already existing rumors have suggested, the idea of bringing first party titles to competing console platforms marks a massive change in strategy for Microsoft. And from what I understand, it's not been without fierce internal debate on this new direction. Releasing Starfield on PlayStation 5 contradicts the original statement around the exclusivity made by President of Xbox Sarah Bond during the Xbox and Bethesda Game Studio Summer Showcase of 2021. According to our sources, Microsoft senior leadership have reportedly debated the various pros and cons of releasing more of their exclusive software elsewhere, and internally, not everyone is necessarily happy about with the decision, but recouping, the potential money, quote unquote, left on the table by releasing elsewhere has arguably won out. So my question, Steve, before we get any deeper on this topic, because there is a little bit more.
Mhm.
What who do you think is on this? Who do you think's on what side here? You think Phil and Sarah Bond and those folks are they want to keep things exclusive and play the long game and try to position Xbox more aggressively, or are they on the side of Game Pass is the future and the box is ancillary and selling the games where you can sell the
Mm.
games is the most because you kind of heard it both ways from Phil, right? Like he has said like I don't care where people play. I want them to play our games. I want, that's why they're on PC. That's why we're bringing them to Nintendo Switch. That's why we want them in the cloud with Game Pass. Is this a natural extension of that strategy? And you have some of the more old school business folks who are like, hey, like we spent all this money on these games. How are we not going to make them exclusive to try and sell the box? Like, I'm very interested in like, where do you think the discourse comes from? Right? Like, who in that room does not I mean, where is that vision diverging, I guess, right? And who's on what side of it is a very interesting question to me. I don't expect you to have the answer, but do you have any thoughts on that?
I think this comes top down from Satya Nadella at Microsoft, the Microsoft CEO, rather than Xbox. I think Phil's probably on side with it. It makes sense from a business perspective. I think it really does. They will make more money doing this, and Microsoft likes to make money. It's a very big company. They are one of the richest companies in the world,
They've also
and their
invested a
name,
shitload of money, right? Like to
yeah.
build up their war chest, and we've been talking about that for years. Where I mean, I think it's pretty clear Game Pass makes a decent amount of money, right? But like you just spent like how many billions of dollars this year? Like
Mhm.
$60 billion this year. You gotta make some of that money
Yeah, but
back.
they did add like 40% additional revenue to their
Yeah.
gaming, division because of that purchase, which was a great investment for them. I, um, I also think it's worth noting that the company's heritage is in software. They're called Microsoft. I think getting into the living room and trying to own the living room with the Xbox was really kind of, just a necessary evil. I think if they didn't have to build the hardware themselves, they probably would have partnered with someone else to do it in the same way that they've always partnered with PC manufacturers to make hardware, until the Surface lineup, obviously. But I think this comes top down. I think it's a strategy that they're just looking at it from a business perspective, and it makes no sense. And I do think for consumers, it makes sense that if you've got an Xbox, you're probably going to subscribe to Game Pass anyway, so you're going to get these games day and date. You're going to get them 6 to 12 months early. And if you don't want to get an Xbox, and there's only a few games you want to play, like something like Starfield, well, you're going to give them $70 to do it now. And why does that really matter? I can understand there's maybe some fear though that um, if they don't release a box next generation, right? If this is the end of the console, I've invested in a digital library with Xbox that's dead. It's not going to go anywhere anymore. I
It
can't
isn't
use
though,
that
right?
anywhere
I don't
else.
think that'll be the case. I think they'll just you'll your Xbox library will just become
It'll probably become a cloud library.
yeah, and you can
But
play it
that's
on
not
your
necessarily what I want, right?
yeah, maybe.
I might want it in the living room in the same way I've got my PlayStation library in the living
Right. But
room.
I mean, theoretically, you'd be able to do that on your Samsung TV or on a
Yeah,
computer
yeah. I
or
mean, we also
or on a
don't know if
or on a
there's
stick, right? We've talked like like an Amazon Fire or Google
Mhm.
whatever the fuck type stick, right? Like, and I don't necessarily think that's where they're going, right? Because like they're number three, but it's not like the Xbox business is a bad business to be in, seemingly, right? Like it's selling fine. It's
the box
selling
makes money though. Like the box isn't what's making the money.
no, but like I also think that it comes back to that question that I think you and I talk about a lot, though, right? Where it's like that's historically been a part of the business model, right? Is like you sell the box at a loss and you make the money back on software. Yeah, sure. Like maybe they're not like, obviously they're cannibalizing their own sales with Game Pass and everything, but like you got to imagine a lot of people are buying a box to get into the Game Pass ecosystem. And
Yeah.
I I don't know that they don't need to be number 1 for that to be a worthwhile thing for them to do, right? Like, even if it's not the most profitable part of the business, I don't think it necessarily means that we need to be worried that, like, the Xbox is going somewhere
Mhm.
right now, I mean, we'll see because I think them doing this could hurt the sales of the Xbox over the course of the rest of its life cycle. You and I and Max were talking about it, when we did our predictions this year of, like, I definitely thought this was gonna be the first year where Microsoft had multiple exclusives that you couldn't ignore, and you'd be forced to buy a second console. And I
I mean,
think
seemingly it may be, because these exclusives that we're talking about, Indiana Jones, might not come out until 2025.
yeah, and I guess that's true. And it's like, do people, the enthusiasts that were gonna buy 2 boxes, do they wanna wait a year? Probably not, and they'll
Who
maybe plunk
knows?
down
I
the
mean, the
money
people who are
anyway, and
really hardcore, they're probably gonna buy them on PC anyway, and you can buy them day and date there.
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Like,
I mean, yeah.
they've never really been exclusive since they followed that strategy anyway. It's not like PlayStation where I actually have to buy the box in order to play it day and date. I've got a
Yeah,
gaming PC,
yeah.
I can play it there anyway.
Then that comes back to the thing you always say though, right? Where it's like those are kind of 2 different consumers, right? Like, it's like my
Mhm.
friend who owns a PlayStation and has a kid, right? Like, he doesn't have a gaming PC, right? He plays all his games on his PlayStation. If Indiana Jones wasn't coming to PlayStation, he might buy an Xbox Series X or S for that, right? Because he's a big Indiana Jones fan, right? And I could see him wanting to, play that game and being like, oh, I'll do that and I'll get Game Pass for a month and I'll try some of these other games and then maybe I'll sell it or whatever, right? But like I can see how that worries some people, right? Of like you're killing that pipeline to, oh, I want to play
I can
Starfield, I
too.
must buy an
Yeah,
Xbox.
yeah.
And I
Yeah,
yeah,
but I mean, Starfield, maybe the reason is because it was a bit of a failure.
it
Like,
wasn't
no
yeah.
one really
If it
bought
was
an
as good as
Xbox in order to do it.
if it was as big a deal
Because
as like Skyrim, for example, right? Like, yeah, they got to be disappointed with the return on that, right? In terms of how much time and investment it was versus how many copies it sold because of how easy it was to play for free. And if it was,
well, or the fact that it probably didn't drive console sales in
no,
the way they hoped it would. Like, they
probably not.
probably looked at the numbers and they're like, "We're gonna release Starfield. It's just in time for the holiday period. Let's see if sales go up because people wanna play Starfield." It just didn't happen because no one really cared. And and I think that's, testament to the fact that the game was probably pretty mid, like, objectively pretty mid, and, like, people weren't that excited about it. I loved the game, it was in my game of the year list,
Yeah, me too.
but most people didn't vibe with it, and you saw that from the reviews, and people were just like, "Ah, okay, whatever." I mean, Indiana Jones is an unknown quantity, that one also may not happen. I also think it's interesting because they could compete on different things now. You're putting your games out everywhere. Compete on price. Make the Xbox versions cheaper than the PlayStation versions, so it's, like, more enticing to play it there. Make your Xbox console cheaper than the PlayStation. We know that Brooklyn leak from last year, there's meant to be a new console coming later this year. What if that's, like, $150 cheaper than a PlayStation 5 now? Because 'Cause we've got rid of, we've done a die shrink, we've got rid of the
Disk
disk
drive.
drive, we don't gotta worry about physical games anymore because 'cause they're seemingly coming off store shelves anyway, and you're probably just going to get it with a Game Pass subscription. Maybe they chuck in 12 months of Game Pass with every new console you buy, and it looks like a really attractive thing. And the next generation, the plans that were outlined in there potentially could be very different from what PlayStation's doing. There was the battle between looking at x86, which is the current architecture, versus potentially moving over to ARM based processors. What if they decided to go with an ARM based processor in the next generation? we've got two very different boxes that do very different things. That maybe Xbox leverages the power of the cloud and AI and all of these things that Microsoft's been investing in over the years that only Microsoft can really do because PlayStation doesn't have that data center infrastructure that Microsoft has. They can't look to do something like they're doing with Kojima on that like dose overdose game.
Right. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know. It's interesting. I think there's other ways they can compete, and and I mean it's also possible that they're just fine with putting games out 12 months later and seeing how it goes. Because it's probably not going to hurt their console sales because their console sales aren't great anyway,
And their
and they know
software
they've
sales
lost
are
their
obviously not
console
very
war.
good, right? Because
Yeah,
like, it's part of like a broader story that I'd love to talk about, right? But like, like the story kind of originally broke back in October, right? That Walmart was going to be getting out of the physical game business and that they're starting with getting rid of Xbox games and that, PlayStation and Nintendo stuff might be to follow, right? But like, those do still sell, right? Like, there was a report just a few weeks ago, I think it was that, 60% of Sony's first party sales are still physical, right? And we know Nintendo games still sell very well physically, right? When there was that, we were looking at the top selling games from, I forget what they're called now, but the formerly MPD group. Um,
a Sakana.
Sakana, thank you. Yeah, and it was like Tears of the Kingdom was like the third best selling game of the year, and it wasn't tracking digital, right? So it's like, oh my god, like that speaks to how many physical copies it sold because it sold really well on digital, right? Um,
Mhm.
so it's not like obviously physical games have been in decline, right? Digital game sales accounted for 60% of the overall market in the United States in 2022. Um, and
What's
that
what's your, like,
trend
stance
is
on physical? Like, how I bought 1 physical game last year.
so if you recall, I bought a couple physical games this year for the first time because I had those GameStop gift cards I got from like a
Yeah.
rewards program. So like I used those and I bought those games and I took advantage of that. But yeah, I mean, I largely don't buy physical games anymore unless they're a collector's edition because there's no real reason to. Like I think all of the arguments that people make for them, ultimately you're at a point where unless you want to have it on a shelf, there's no reason to buy it because what you're buying is a code on a disc. And why would I
Mhm.
do that when I can just get the fucking code? And generally, right? Like I am a night owl, so I want to stay up and play a game at midnight on release, not go and get it at 9 a.m. or on my lunch break the next day and then not play it until the next night. I want to get, like on when Persona 3 dropped the other night, right? I got 3-4 hours into it in the first night. That's a big chunk of the game. That's valuable time. And again, right? Like I want to take advantage of things like quicker zoom. I want to take advantage of, the ability to just jump in and out of games and not have to have every game that I'm actively playing be in my entertainment center, right? And then hitting that
Mhm.
point where it's like, I'm not playing this game anymore. So now I have to move the box somewhere else so that I can have the new games that I'm playing here. And then I'm storing all these games in my basement and never looking at them and keeping them because,
Yeah, I mean, I did a big trade-in. I was like, "I've not played any of these games
yeah,
forever." And that is one thing I love about physical games, that you can recoup some of the cost back by trading them in if you want to. But in the UK, game shut down trade-ins. They're not doing that anymore. There's only really one place you can do trade-ins now, CEX. And I don't know. For me, the reason why was I mainly became mostly a PC player playing on Steam Deck. That's obviously all digital. And on Xbox, I play Game Pass. The only real platform I really buy physical games for is the Switch at the moment, and because I like having the cartridges.
even that I don't actually anymore because I've realized every time I buy a cartridge game, it's a fucking hassle. Because like,
Mm.
for example, right, like I got Super Mario Bros. Wonder physically with one of those gift cards. And whenever I wanna like, when I was actively playing it, I was doing Ring Fit, and I'm like, every fucking time I wanna like, I gotta
Oh
switch
yeah,
the
that did
goddamn
annoy me.
cartridge.
Yeah, it's been
It's
Ring Fit.
fucking
Yeah,
annoying. And it's like, it's such a, like, stupid first world problem, like, "Oh, I
or
want."
Animal Crossing was the same. It's like I wanted to play a little bit of Animal Crossing every single day.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's like, I intentionally bought Smash digitally when it came out, and that was when I was still getting physical games, because I knew that would be annoying, and I didn't wanna have to have the cart with me every time I wanted to play the game. So yeah, I think we're at a point where it's like there's really not like at least Switch games, the games are still on the fucking carts. So there
Not
is
always though, like, there's
not
some where
always.
it's, like, internet download required on the box, but
Right.
all I know all first party Nintendo ones, they're on the cart, right?
Right.
And
Exactly.
Xbox did a pretty good job of putting a lot of their games on the disc, unless it was a smart delivery game, and then
PlayStation doesn't
often
do
it
it
didn't.
at all. So it's just
No.
there's no reason. There's really no reason. But whatever, right? So
But, I know there are die-hard physical fans that will be upset at the potential
yeah,
news that physical Xbox games are gonna go away.
and I get
And they
that.
probably and I can see that, to be honest, like, I know one of my predictions was there would be a way to play physical games with the new
Yeah.
digital-only Xbox. Maybe there isn't. Maybe there is no way.
Maybe not. Yeah, maybe not. Um, and I mean, I do understand it, right? Totally, because I mean, I've seen a lot of people, um, kind of talking about this a lot lately with like everything that's been going on with streamers and everything, right? With like Max and all that content that got removed, and it's like there is this kind of attitude of like maybe we should be getting back into physical media, right? And that like you should own the things you want to own and not be at the whim of these like shady streamers that can just like write things off and then delete them from their platform and then you never see them again. And, they never got an official release. And it's like,
Yeah, but what stops the console manufacturers saying this disc doesn't work in this console anymore? Like,
exactly. That's the thing is
I go to put the disc in, and the software's been updated, and it says you can't play this game.
physical
No,
video
literally
games,
nothing.
physical video games are already removed from that. Right. Cause I think like even with the like Nintendo thing where it's like, oh, the game's on the whole cartridge. It's like, yeah, but it had a day one patch.
Yeah, and you can't play it without the day one patch because it comes up, and it's like you need to update this software before you can play it.
So, it's like at the end of the day, like I don't think your collection is any safer because you have that physical copy, right? You're still at the whim of Nintendo or PlayStation or whomever, right, maintaining servers and allowing you to download the things you need. And yeah, like they're doing it now, but like there's gonna come a point where they won't. And then what is it? Just a brick, right? So it's like, I don't know. I think that's where like we get into conversations about ethical piracy and all that kind of stuff and how that's like a huge part of game preservation because
Mhm.
games are like physical cartridges degrade, right? And laser rot is a thing, disc rot is a thing, right? Like, there's gonna come a point where all the physical copies we have don't work anymore, and like all we can do is protect the code, right? And like at the end of the day, like that's gonna be the salvation of your library is making sure that you have backups and that you dump your games and that you have them available on emulators and like that's really the way that you're gonna protect your library moving forward, doing that ethically, right? And, I think that's a thing that, like, as digital media only becomes more dominant, I think that's maybe a thing we as a culture need to kind of re-explore. Because you think about the early days of the internet when like streaming wasn't viable. And like, you and I grew up during like the MP3 and iPod era, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah, I was on LimeWire and Kazaa and all that stuff
And it's like
back
maybe
then.
you didn't like buy physical albums or maybe you did and then you ripped them or whatever, right? But it's like you had a collection of music and you owned it and you took it with you places and like you built a library, right? And I think now that we're in the age of like paying for access to things like with Game Pass, right? Like we've traded owning and curating a library for the convenience of access. And I think that has pros and cons. And I definitely understand why there are those physical diehards that want to maintain those things and have them in a way that's tangible and something that they feel like they have more control over. But I feel like by and large the industry is just moving away from that and they're not going to give us those options more
It
and more.
has with every other it has with every other medium. Video,
Difference is
music,
though all those other mediums, though, they're not as fucked as games are in the way that we're talking about. Because I can buy a physical copy of Spider-Man 2, but the game's not on the disc, and I need a patch, and I need this and that.
Mhm.
Like, if I go buy a Blu-ray of my favorite movie, I have a fucking copy of it, and as long as I have a
It
Blu-ray
also
player, I can watch it. And like,
only
that's not
plays on
how
a
it works with
PlayStation
video games.
5 though. Like, what happens if the PS6 moves to a different architecture? Like, you got that problem with the PS3, right? I can only play PS3 games on a PS3, they're a pain. They
Yeah, but
can't
that's
be
that's the
played on
thing
anything
is,
else.
to your point, that's not the case with every other medium. Because even if I had like, if I bought a
To some
Blu-ray.
extent it was though, right? Like, I can't put fucking vinyl in a laserdisc player and, like, they're the same size and expect them
No,
to
but if
work,
you own a record
VHS
player,
doesn't
you can
directly
play a
go
vinyl,
to.
right? And you can buy
Yeah.
a record player. And that's the whole thing is like, to your point, 20, 30, 50 years from now, right? PlayStation's like, "Hey, we're on the PlayStation 10. We're going to shut down the PS5 servers. So your copy of Spider-Man 2 that you bought, you got to buy a new one," right? Like they could do that to you and you would have no recourse. Whereas like if you own a disc or whatever, right? Like again, or like a book, right? Like who cares if they make a new format? My format still works. I still own a
Mhm.
copy of it and you don't necessarily have that luxury. And like with those things, it's like it's easier to rip them, right? It's easier to rip a video file and keep it moving with you or music, all that kind of stuff, right? Like you could have a high quality MP3 from 30 years ago and it would still be just as good as the new one you get now. And it's like it's inherently not that way with games and software just because of the way that the tech is always evolving and all that stuff, right? And it's like yeah, I mean, I think it's something that like we're gonna have to reckon with, like as we move forward, and that we've been building digital libraries for over a generation now, right? And it's I think like as what Xbox quote unquote means evolves, how that library moves and evolves with you will have to evolve, right? But I don't think Xbox is gonna hit a point where it's like, hey, we don't have the box anymore, so now like you're fucked, right? Like I imagine if there isn't a way to play physical games on this new Xbox, they'll probably have some kind of program where you can like what
I
do
don't know about that. I
you don't
don't know
think
about
so?
that because remember when the PSP moved to, like, the PSP Go and everyone was like,
Yeah.
"How the fuck do I play all my games? Is there gonna be some kind of
That's
program?" And
Sony
there
though,
wasn't.
right? Like
I do
I think
not
Xbox
see.
does it,
I don't know. I don't know
you know?
how do you do that? I guess you mail the discs in? Maybe
No, I
that's the
mean think
way?
about it. That's what happened with I mean, and maybe I'm wrong. And if I'm misremembering how this system works, then please correct me in the comments. But um wasn't that how it worked with the original Xbox games? Once they added backwards compatibility, you put the disc in and then you would download it on the store?
Well, it would just download it, but it would still read the disc as like a key, and that's how it works now on Xbox Series X as well. The problem is if you've got nowhere to put the disc in, how does it
How do you
work?
prove that? That's a good
Because you've
question.
got no license for it
Yeah, no,
then.
you're right. Maybe you need to have an Xbox console with a disc drive, and you do that, and then you can trade it in.
It's like a transfer of ownership, but then
Yeah,
what? Is the disc burnt? Like, they've gotta have some kind of way
yeah,
to, like,
deactivate
get
it.
rid of that disc.
It would have to have a key associated with it, so you just couldn't activate it again,
Yeah,
right?
but then I could trade that disc in and someone else ends up with or sell it on Facebook or eBay and, like, someone's then bought that disc and it's, like, no longer works
Yeah,
and it's, like, a
I
whole
don't know.
thing. Like, that's a real process that they need to consider. The only way it would work is if you mailed the discs in and then they transfer it onto your account.
Which, I mean, I guess they could do. I don't know. Seems a little crazy, but you make a good point.
Would you do that, though? Would you mail your discs in? Switch all your physical stuff to digital?
No, I don't have any reason to upgrade my console, right? Like, just to get the exact same box, but it doesn't have a disk drive and it's
Yeah, but
smaller is
next
like
generation is probably not gonna have the disk drive.
if that was the case, then yeah, I would.
Mhm.
But at that point, it's like, what is that? 2 games? Like, I think I bought exactly 1 physical Xbox game, and I think it was Cyberpunk.
No,
So
you bought Hitman and it's still sealed and you've
oh,
never
you're
played
right.
it.
I did do that.
Yeah, you
Sorry,
did.
I got 2 games. I got 2 games in my library I'll have to mail to them. So yeah, I'd do it. That'd be easy. We've got a lot more Xbox talk to get into in just a second here, but before we do that, let me remind you that this episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of February. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valens, Earth Visitor, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Asobi, Snackago, Steve Stompy, Susan Likes Cats and also Boobies, Ty the Dude, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/FlipScreenGames. You're all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. Remember, if you want to go check out some of those sister shows, if you want to write in to our question block, just like a bunch of you did this week, if you want to get involved in the Discord and keep the conversation rolling between episodes, or if you want to go check out some of the cool new short form content we've been doing over on TikTok and Instagram Reels, make sure you head over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you will find links to all the places we are all over the web and much more. However you choose to get involved or show your support, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the show. Let's get back into it. All right, so we'll close this segment out here. Uh, Big Phil, big Uncle Phil came and replied, right? Seeing everybody melt down on social media, and he said, "We're listening and we hear you. We've been planning a business update event for next week, where we look forward to sharing more details with you about our vision for the future of Xbox. Stay tuned." And apparently, according to Jeff Grubb, when he was, talking about the Gears thing, they were apparently originally planning to have some kind of event like this in late February, and I guess seemingly they're pushing that up to,
It's a
combat.
Valentine's gift to us all from Xbox, so they can share how much they love us.
Sure. I doubt that's the sentiment amongst the hardcore Xbox fans today, but yeah, I think you and I can get away with that.
But what if the, like, event happens and it's like, "Yeah, we're bringing our multiplayer games to other platforms." Wow, great, groundbreaking. And this smaller title, we've decided to experiment and bring it over after it's been out on another platform a year ago. But we've got no plans to bring Starfield and Indiana Jones, and all of that reporting was nonsense. Like, then
I
what?
I think they say
The
that at their
discourse was
peril.
for no reason?
I think they say that at their own peril because I think I mean, I don't know. I guess unless this is all smoke, right? And no fire, and there's no truth to the fact that bigger marquee quote unquote titles like Starfield or Indiana Jones are going to be coming to PlayStation 5, then yeah, then it was bullshit, right? And it was discourse for discourse's sake. I think that's probably pretty unlikely. I think it's pretty unlikely that there's this much smoke and no fire, and that Phil would say, "We hear you, and we're gonna have an event next week where we talk about the future." Like to me, that feels like an acknowledgement that on some level, what's been reported is true. And I think even if they don't come out and say, "Hey, yup, this is what's happening, and this is why, and it's unfortunate that it leaked, but this is," like I think Xbox is really, really fast approaching a place where no one is going to believe a fucking thing they say anymore in events. Cause like I feel that way. And I'm not even bitter about it. Cause like I own an Xbox and I'm very, very genuinely happy with that purchase. I like the ecosystem. I think Game Pass has been a great, thing for me. And like I have no complaints about how Xbox has run things or the idea that they were going to do this, right? I don't feel burnt by this decision.
Mhm.
That said, this now marks the what? Third, fourth time where they've had one of these major Xbox presentations and they've made a promise or said something to consumers to encourage them to make a purchase or do something, and it's been bullshit, right? Every game we're showing is coming out in the next 18 months. It's going to be the best 18 months of Xbox. Almost none of those games came out, right? Some of them have just come out, right? Um, this is now right, Starfield, and it's gonna be exclusive. Oh, for a year, asterisk. That's bullshit. And again, they sold us a fucking box that said Halo on it, and then Halo didn't come out either, right? So it's like, how
Mhm.
many times do we have to
Some of that I
have?
think can't be helped, like, there was a global
Yeah,
pandemic.
you're right. And also, that doesn't matter to the consumer, right? And it's like
Mhm.
I can look at that objectively and say, well, this happened and that happened and plans
I mean,
changed.
I think to some extent it does, like, you look at the I don't know, maybe Xbox doesn't get given enough, as, like, a longer rope as PlayStation does. Like, PlayStation delayed The Last of Us Part 2
Yep,
because of the pandemic,
sure.
and everyone was like, "Okay,
Yeah.
do what you need to do. We get
But
it."
they also didn't come out pounding their chest around a marketing beat that it was coming out on this date and this and that and this. And it's
Mhm.
like,
They
I
did
think
they did though, they did. They had, like, "It's coming out in February, it's gonna be this," and
no,
then,
you're right,
you know
but that's one game. And I think
Yeah.
that rings differently than here's an event. All of these games are coming in the next 18 months. Even Hollow Knight too? Yes. And then none of them did. Like
Mhm.
that is so different than because right, if it was like Starfield was the one game that got delayed, that wouldn't even be you wouldn't even be talking about it. Right? It's like games get delayed all the time. It's not a big deal if a game gets delayed. I get planning your flag in a date and then you want to make sure, shit happens. But I think having an entire presentation around this is what the next year and change of Xbox looks like, and then it's like actually about 2 or 3 of those games came out is like, that sucks. And, I think with all the discourse, like we've had this generation about like, where are all the games? Where are all the exclusives? Like Xbox is supposed to have a big exclusive every quarter, and like they just haven't. And when they have, like Redfall was a failure, and Starfield underperformed, and the ones that really, really have come out and hit are like smaller niche indie titles that don't necessarily sell consoles, right? Like I don't know if anybody's
I think
buying
that's
a
the problem.
Xbox.
I don't
Like,
think anything is gonna sell consoles for them, and I think that's the problem, and I think maybe they finally read the writing on the wall, and they're like, "Who cares? Because we
maybe,
own this platform, we own all these studios,
yeah,
we own the PC gaming space." As much as, like, Linux is like a tiny little blip of, like, 3%, it's
sure.
still only 3%, and 90% is Microsoft. Like, they own that space.
Yeah, but
What if
like, do
they
they? Because PC gaming is owned by Steam. They just own the
Yeah, but
OS.
guess what? You gotta buy a copy of Windows.
Yeah, but
Do
what
they
does that do for
care?
Xbox? It's like
It's the same company at the end of the day.
yeah, I
Like,
know, but like it's also not, right? Like it's Xbox was spun off. It's its own thing. And like I don't know that like there being Xbox games on PC is helping Windows like that. It's like I hear what you're saying, and I think that like there's a lot of truth to it. I guess my question is, it seems kind of wacky to me to concede this ground when you've never actually committed to the vision, right? Like it's like you have on paper, but you've never actually had the year where Xbox has multiple must play games that you have to get an Xbox for. And I
mhm.
think you're finally there. And to concede now feels kind of crazy to me. And like, I guess it is what it is, right? And it's to your point, maybe it's just like, it's not worth fighting this fight because you're never going to win. You're never going to be number one, so why try and force taking market share when you can just increase your profit margin, right? And I think that there's that.
Yeah, you become a publisher that everyone considers to be, like, high tier.
Yeah,
I mean, Activision was, Bethesda was, ZeniMax was. You just kinda brought them under your belt. I don't know. I'm also interested in what the fuck a business update event is. Like, that is the most corporate sounding thing ever. Like, it's not very exciting for
no,
a
I think it's gonna
Xbox
be like a
fan.
YouTube apology video where Phil just comes out and sits down and talks to us. It's like feels very strange. We've
Yeah,
heard your
it's just weird.
concerns.
Really, really weird. Like, I don't. I mean, I'd have been like, we've got some really exciting news next week. We're really going to show you the vision of what we. I mean, they've talked about the vision and the future of Xbox, but like, I don't know. I maybe would have given a little bit more information rather than a paragraph of text.
I
Like,
don't know. I think it's so tough because I really think that like there's almost no way that this news is not received poorly, and I think he knows that, and I think that there's pretty much no way to do this that doesn't look like a admission of failure on some level, right? Like I want to pull in some questions from the question block because a lot of you guys wrote in with your thoughts today. This one comes from one of our Patreon producers, Snackago, who wrote in and said, in regard to Xbox going multiplat, the question, oh God, somebody just sent a new message and messed me up. Hold on. The question must be asked, are the console wars finally over? And I mean, here's the thing. Console wars never really existed and they never really stopped, right? That's the whole thing. It all started with marketing, but at the end of the day, products compete for mind share and market space, right? And I think it's hard to not read this as a concession that we lost, and we're number 3, and that's what it is. And I don't think that that's inherently a bad thing. I think most of
mhm.
Xbox's best decisions, right? Like, at least in recent memory, right? I've all been because they were in last place. Like them doing Game Pass, them deepening their bench of developer power and everything. Like all of those things were totally motivated by them being unable to compete with Sony and what they did with the PlayStation 4, right? So like, I don't know that we need Xbox to just keep continually chasing PlayStation and being able to exist because they're propped up by one of the most profitable, indestructible companies in the world, and they spend billions of dollars buying other companies that are already successful, right? Like, I, maybe that is just a waste of time at this point, and that it's better to accept that you're number three, continue to offer, you know, a good service there as a inroad in the same way that downloading the app on your tablet or on your smart TV or getting it on your PC or whatever is another inroad. And that like just really, really, truly committing to that vision in every way, even as far as saying like we don't believe in exclusives anymore because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you buy the box, right? Like we're gonna
Yeah,
get
what I
you.
mean, what if that's the messaging? Like, we think exclusives are bad for players, and like we encourage, PlayStation to do the same, and we kind of hope that we can kind of now get to a point where it doesn't really matter what box you buy; it's all about the games. It's always been about the games for us.
Yeah,
I
I
think that's
mean,
probably the messaging.
my hot take is that there's actually literally no evidence or good reasoning besides you not wanting to buy more hardware that exclusives are actually bad. There's no evidence that they're bad for video games or that they're bad for software, right? Like a lot of exclusive games get paid for by being exclusive and it helps them be more profitable even if they're a more niche genre or something like that. And I argue that exclusives are what breed identity for a platform, right? The first thing that someone in our Discord said when I shared this news was longtime listener left, right? Said, "Oh, I'm never going to buy an Xbox now." And I believe he
Mhm.
would have. He's talked about it for years, right? There are multiple games he wanted to play. And he's not the type of person who's maybe going to buy it day one, but if there was a sale and he could jump in and he could play this or that or this or that, yeah, probably, right? Like he
What if you don't need an identity anymore? What if you're a platform? Steam doesn't have an identity really. Like, maybe Valve had Half-Life, but they've definitely become more known for Steam,
Sure, but I
and
think that's their
and I think
identity, is
Xbox
being
could be that.
it's the de facto place to play PC games, though, and
Yeah,
I
and
think
what if
that
Xbox wants to become the de facto place to play games full stop,
I
no
just
matter
don't
where you are, no matter what platform you're on?
I don't think I think that is I think in the same way that you and I just sat here and agreed that they're number 3 and they're never gonna be number 1, that's also never gonna happen. There's no universe where because it's the same fucking problem, man, right? Where it's like, okay, if you want to be the one-stop shop, right? Like, okay, so what about the PC gamers that already have a Steam library? What about the console gamers that have been building a PlayStation library for 2
Mhm.
generations? What about the folks that like Nintendo games, right? What about the folks that want to have a handheld gaming solution? And Xbox doesn't offer that, right? Like
Yeah, but what if they do? Like, the handheld gaming solution could come, or there could be like, this could all be in this event, right? We don't know what's
maybe,
gonna be announced
yeah,
there,
sure.
but it's also you're also right, they're in 3rd place, and it's not the first time this company has been in 3rd place with something. Remember Windows Phone? They were really lagging behind iPhone and Android, and they're just like, "Eh,
You know,
enough's enough. We'll bring Office and all of our other products to the other platforms,
or
so
the
who
original
cares?"
Xbox, right, was number 3, right? And it's like the 360 is the one example where they weren't number 3, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, I don't know, right? Because then I think there's an argument to be made there. Why would we assume that they would work on a handheld, right? When they've not been able to be successful in the market they've been in for
'Cause I I
4
I think the
generations?
handheld I think the handheld makes sense because you look at you look at Steam Deck, right? You look at the ROG Ally. I think you could do a Surface handheld PC as a Microsoft product that has like an Xbox skin on it that makes it run like an Xbox, and it has all of your Xbox games on it. It comes with Game Pass preloaded. You can play and download anything, and you can also stream anything that's on your
I just
library.
don't see that because it's like that's expensive unless it's a PlayStation Portal knockoff, and we all know how
They've
that
already got
was
one. They already
received.
had one of those. They partnered with Logitech and did the G Cloud thing, and
Right.
it just, no one cared.
So it's just like, do you really think they're gonna invest the R&D and try to market and sell a $500-600 handheld? Because I don't. I'd
I
love them
think if
to. I
it's
don't think they will.
I think they could, and I think they probably pretty successful at it. The Surface products are pretty successful products for them, and a lot of people like those products. They like the tablets, they like the laptops. It's a known brand. I could
Yeah.
see that. But I could also see them making it like an Xbox operating system and doing something like that. I'd like that anyway. But maybe that's wishful thinking. It's really I really don't know. I really can't predict where this goes. I can't. But I don't know that I don't know that I agree with you that exclusives are not inherently bad. I think it silos people off. I think it's bred the console wars. I think it turns people into absolute assholes online. It's constantly talking about Xbox has no games, PlayStation has no games. Like,
Oh,
genuinely, who
come
cares?
on. You can't, like, people are assholes no matter what, though, dude.
Yeah,
Like,
they
it's
are.
it's like, I don't think that you can, like, attribute there being exclusive games to that's the reason we have console warriors, right? It's like, no, we have console
But
warriors
it's
because a
also
lot of
led
people that play
to
video games are pricks, you know? And
it
it's same as,
it's
like,
also led
anything.
to mass consolidation, though. Like, I think if it wasn't the hunt for exclusives, I don't think Microsoft would have bought Bethesda and Activision. Maybe they would have, and maybe the Activision deal closing, the fact that they can now put streaming apps on the iPhone, maybe that has led to this business decision and them kind of pivoting away because they've seen how much money they can, once they got the Activision books, they can like, oh shit, we can make fuckloads of
I
cash
mean,
here.
that's my argument there, and like maybe this is a deeper conversation though, right? Is like I think you're blaming exclusive games for the failures of the Western world to not stop consolidation, right? Because
Mhm.
every government just fucking rolls over anytime a multi-million or multi-billion dollar corporation wants to gobble up another
There's
portion of
not
a
enough
market.
legislation. Like, what
Right.
like, it was shown that Microsoft hadn't, like there was nothing there to stop them. Something else
Right.
needs to be written in order for it to be
Exactly.
stopped.
Right. And that's kind of my point, right? Is like I think that shows that the reason that Microsoft is doing that is because they're not able to make quality software on their own, right? Like all of their biggest exclusives, every one of them they purchased, right? Like they bought Bungie when Halo was done. They bought Gears of War from Epic. They bought like every fucking studio that they've got, right? It's not the Nintendo thing, the PlayStation thing, and granted, those companies buy studios too, right? PlayStation has acquired almost all of their
Insomniac, Naughty Dog.
right, exactly, totally, and they like I do think it's a little different to buy a company like Naughty Dog after you've had a relationship for a few years in the early stages of that company's development and then nurturing it for like decades and creating a culture there, right? And like maintaining it rather than
Mhm.
buying a multi-billion dollar company and then just be absorbing it. That's not quite the same thing. But fair enough. That is what it is, right? Um, but you look at
Insomniac wasn't that though. Like,
no,
maybe they had partnered with them, but it was like, "Oh, you did you did Spider-Man, it was great,
they've
we're gonna buy
literally
you
been
now."
working with them since Spyro the Dragon, right? It's
Mhm.
just they were not interested in being acquired up until recently, I guess. Um,
There are some games though that they have developed in-house. Like, yes, they bought Rare, but I think Rare is an example where they have cultivated that culture, and Sea of Thieves has been
the culture
successful
that
for
is
them.
there now is cultivated by Xbox. I think that's definitely fair, right? Because the rare of now is not the rare of the 90s and earlier.
Mhm.
So totally fair play. Um, but it's not like any of those games really set the world on fire either, right? Like Sea of Thieves is a success now. It wasn't a blockbuster fucking hit or anything like that either, though. And that's not to like talk shit, right? Like I like Xbox's games. My point is more that though, like you look at Nintendo, right? Nintendo's whole business is built on making exceptional exclusive software and
Mhm.
making exceptional hardware that supports that software and has a unique relationship with that software, right? Like Tears of the Kingdom is a master fucking piece video game and also and Breath of the Wild, right? They're also both inherently designed with the platform they're on in mind. And like PlayStation, Xbox don't make games that way. And like, I think that is the benefit of exclusives, right? Is that the fact that they make that shit the way they make it for one console, it gets to play differently and you experience things differently. And it doesn't have to like, we talked about this with the technology in PlayStation games. Look at how incredible The Last of Us Part 2 looks as the last big PlayStation 4 exclusive, right? That game looks as incredible as it does because they are able to intimately get familiar with one piece of hardware and develop for it for an entire generation and make something that's really exceptional and high quality and not that didn't have to get, okay, here's the PS5 version and we simultaneously need to get an Xbox version and a PC version ready and test all of them. And it's like those are things that like they're obviously eminently doable, but they do make a difference. And there's a reason that the end of console generation exclusives from Sony are often like incredible graphical, benchmarks. And I think
Mhm.
that's something that is beneficial of exclusive software is getting to just focus on making one version of it really good and really polished and really special. And, I think you can argue, I guess for good or ill, like whether or not creating a console identity, right, or a brand identity is like good or important for consumers, or is that just like a marketing thing? But I would argue it is. Like, I think there's a reason that there's a higher percentage of gamers that are emotionally invested in Nintendo or Sony versus Xbox. And I think that's why. It's like, there's this sense of you're a part of like a community, right? And you're a part of this like you are having a conversation with that library, right? As it grows and as you develop with it. And like when I look back on this generation, I'm going to look back on like the Nintendo Switch and be like, think of all the incredible games on the Nintendo Switch. And
Mhm.
it's Tears of the Kingdom and it's Mario Odyssey and it's this and it's that. And you think about how those games were designed to be games that you could play on the big screen for hours at a time or to have those little bite-sized moments. And that's inherently part of the console and the design, or in the same way that we think about the revolution that was Wii Sports at the time, or the way that Pokemon took advantage of the Game Boy and the link cable hardware to do something that had never been done before. Like that that breeds a relationship with a hard piece of hardware and gets you to the point where you're like, this is my favorite console and I have it tattooed on my body, or I remember this. And and you can sit here and be cynical about that and say that it's all marketing and it's all engendering loyalty to a fucking multi-million dollar corporation that doesn't give a shit about you. Fair enough. And I think that it's I think the reason people get into that stuff, it's the same reason that people like root for a sports team or something, right? It's like when you are really connected to something, it becomes part of your identity, right? And I think there's a way to be toxic about that and be an asshole and pick fights with strangers on the internet because you think the Xbox has shitty games. I think the other side of that is when I walk around Philadelphia and I'm wearing my Sony hoodie, right? I get stopped every time I wear it by some other dude that plays PlayStation and is like, yo, what's up? Right? Like the other day I was shopping and I had on and this dude like points and he's like, yo, live in your world, playing ours. And I was like, yeah, man, like, yeah, what's up? And it's like, it's, you get that sense of community, right? And I think that has a positive side to it. And I think that
Mhm.
like that is a big thing with breeding. What does it mean to be a Nintendo player or a PlayStation player or an Xbox player, right? And it's like, I think Xbox has lost that identity more and more over time because it's becoming this, it's everything, it's whatever you want it to be. And like, I think that that is actually a good thing for them because what their identity was, right? I think during their peak is fallen out of favor, right? They were the third person shooter place or first person shooter. Like it was this very specific type of game that they were pushing, right? And that was the top of their, their charts and everything. And like now I think they're clearly trying to be like, we have something for everybody. And that's cool. And it's led to a really
Which
diverse
is good. I
offering.
think, yeah, I
And
think that's what people need.
I agree.
But, I mean, that's what people needed for their specific console, because it was always like, we don't have any family-friendly games, we don't have any third-person platformers.
We have shooters. We have shooters and we have
Doesn't
shooters.
really matter if all your games are available on the consoles that do have family-friendly games and do have third-person platformers or
And I think it's
third-person narrative games.
and I think it's literally fine, right? That they're deciding like, hey, maybe that's just not us, right? And it's like, we're not gonna, it's not
It worked for Sega in the end.
did
I think
it?
so. I mean, the Dreamcast was a absolute disaster. The Saturn was an absolute disaster. Look at the Xbox One, it was an absolute disaster. This generation's probably not gone the way that Microsoft wanted it to go. Maybe it is like, let's cut our losses. Yeah, and how many times have people invested in bad hardware over the years? Even Nintendo players. The Wii U was crap
Sure.
by
I think
comparison,
you
right?
can give Xbox that, right? They're perpetual number 3, but, like, I don't think they've ever made a console that, like, maybe the Xbox One. But, I mean, I don't look at this
Hey,
series
but they turned that around. The One
yeah,
X
you're
really
right.
changed the
You're right.
narrative. Project Scorpio, they got Phil in. It was like, we're gonna bin off the Kinect. No one really wants that. It's like focusing on the
Like,
games
I don't think
again.
they make bad hardware. I don't think that's the problem. I think they make good hardware, and I think their services are really good, but, like
And I think the services is where the money is. I really do. I think Game Pass is where the money is. Subscription revenue. It's what every company is chasing is services revenue. Even
yeah, but
PlayStation's chasing it.
yeah, and it's like you're literally not wrong. It's also just like, oof, I don't know, man. I mean, I think it's such an interesting thing of like, where is the tipping point for that, right? Like, here,
Mhm.
we got another this is, one that, your dad, Andy Rads, wrote in and said, "Rumor seems to be that Microsoft first-party studios will release onto other platforms after a year, meaning exclusivity is only at launch. Do you consider this is the model they will opt for, or is this all just hot air? And if this does happen, is it proof that Game Pass is not the money spinner they had hoped?" I think that's a thing I find interesting, right? Of like, you're definitely right that there is a lot of money to be made in services. And we've seen how companies like Netflix, right, have struggled to maintain enough content and to invest in enough content to keep people on the
Th
hook
th they did figure a lot of that shit out though. Like this last year, flooding it with crappy reality TV shows that costs dimes to make,
and
and
going back
like
to what they used to do and licensing big movies and stuff.
licensing big movies, and then saying you can't share your passwords, which everyone thought was going to be a disaster, but led to increased subscriptions. Moving to the ad based model was only great for their business. Like they've made really good moves,
Sure.
and I think Microsoft and Xbox could probably make similar really good moves.
I think in some ways, yeah, but I also think that there is like a struggle because I think a lot of those monetization models are not as clear for games, right? Like I don't think there's like what does an ad supported version of Game Pass look like?
I don't know that you necessarily need it. And like Microsoft now has such a ginormous library with decades of games from themselves and ZeniMax and Activision, along with Candy Crush, which prints money,
Mhm.
that they can just be like, here you
Just goes,
go, play all of these. Like
yeah.
go for it. You know, it's they're like the Disney Plus
Mhm.
to Netflix. They've got it all. You come here and
Yeah,
you
super deep library that you could just jump
Mhm.
into. And it's like, I mean, obviously there's a ton of value in that, right? But I mean, I guess it's like, they're aggressively spending money, they're aggressively making deals to get content on here, and I think that that's clearly
Pennies though
worked.
when it's like $3 trillion in the like, that's how much your company's worth. It's like, this is
Right.
nothing. Like, seems
Yeah,
like a
but
lot of
then I
money
mean,
to
it's
us.
like, I guess it's just like to what end, right? Like it's like because you look at this now, right? Look at the situation we're in today. Why are they selling their games on other platforms if the amount of money that they make on Game Pass is enough? I think the answer is that it's not. And I think that that doesn't mean that it can't be. I think that the entire point of what they're doing with Game Pass is spending a lot of money now and laying down roots now so that when this becomes a major segment of the video game market, like it has with music, like it has with movies, like it has with
Mhm.
every other fucking thing, they're betting it will, and when it does, they'll be on top, and they'll be positioned to be number 1, and all that money that they invested, they'll make back and then some, right? And then in the meantime, they're buying games like Candy Crush and, Call of Duty and all these other things that make a lot of money and will start offsetting that investment by improving their profitability, right? All well and good. But it's like we're I don't know, man. It's like I guess my question is like is that taking too long? And is that why you're seeing them do this? Like, is this a sign of them being gun shy? Is this a sign that,
I don't think
or
so. I
or
think
is it
it's the
just
same.
like a commitment, a doubling down, seeing that this
Yeah,
is where the
I think it's
money is?
probably that. I
Yeah.
think it's like PlayStation going, "We need to put our games on PC." because
Right.
we can make the money there. Like, it doesn't harm our consoles, it doesn't harm our platform, it doesn't harm our ecosystem. We can put the games there and it will be fine. And I think Xbox knows that too, that the people that wanna buy a PlayStation are gonna buy a PlayStation, they're gonna keep buying the PlayStation. They're gonna buy the PlayStation 6, the PlayStation 7, the PlayStation 8. They're gonna be a PlayStation player for the rest of their lives. And why would you not invest in that? I think ultimately, you're right. They see cloud streaming, cloud gaming, play your games anywhere as the strategy. Phil's been pretty open and honest that that's what he wants. He wants you to be able to play your games anywhere, and I believe him. I know you said that there's been a lot of kind of backtracking, a lot of the stuff that Xbox has said, but that is one thing I think Phil's always believed in is that
Yeah,
he
I agree.
thinks that cloud streaming is the future.
Yeah, I think you're right. It'll be interesting to see. I think the at the very least, right, like, Xbox is my favorite of the 3 to watch and to report on because 'cause they're just
Yeah,
so
yeah, they always have
unpredictable.
been.
And, like, not in the way that Nintendo's unpredictable where they just do, like, wacky shit. It's like Xbox is like at like, Phil's trying to, like, play 4D chess, right? He's trying to think about Xbox 15 years from now, and I think that's cool. And I don't know, I guess I just really wonder because, like, there are some ways in which the video game industry is very prone to shakeups and innovation, and then there are other ways in which we are very set in our ways, and the business model has not changed since it started, right? And, like, ah, it's interesting. It's interesting to see them try to shake it up and that they've had as much trouble as they had seemingly
Mhm,
translating that into very, very observable success. Not to say that they've been unsuccessful, because I think we know Game Pass makes money. We know that they've changed the fortunes of Xbox for the better. I guess I just really wonder if, like, are they positioning themselves as strongly for the future as they seem to be and as much as they think they are? Because, like, man, the proof has just not been in that pudding, right? And, like, we keep saying maybe this is the year, maybe this is the year. This just feels like another thing you can look at and be like, is this another confident step forward or is this a concession? Is this a compromise? And I think you're probably right, but I got to tell you, I'm not confident that it's one or the other. I don't know, which I think is wild to see a company spending this much money, making these many moves that feel so confident, and then also seeing these stumbles along the way,
mhm.
right? And wondering like, is this
PlayStation's
house of
made their own
cards more
stumbles, though.
precarious than we think it is, you know?
Yeah. I mean, but PlayStation's House of Cards seemed to come collapsing last year. Jim Ryan is gone. He's
Mhm.
gone now, right? Because
Yeah.
they've got a new interim CEO.
Yep. Yeah.
God knows what PlayStation's plan is, because it's not live service games anymore, and they've
Seemingly.
invested billions into that. Bungie was a disaster. That was a terrible acquisition on their part.
Yeah.
Microsoft really dodged a bullet on that one by the sounds of it. And like, yeah, they've got some great games that were shown off at the State of Play. Majority of those weren't their own, though. They weren't from PlayStation Studios. It was partnerships that they developed with other studios to bring those games. What's PlayStation Studios up to other than wasting billions on live service games?
Yeah, and that's gonna be the question, I think, is like, how far did these plans get in? Did they waste a ton of time and money trying to get projects like this off the ground, and now there's gonna be a drought? But I think similar to what we saw with the PS4, like, they do have the benefit of being the market leader and that, like, the console sells based on the strength of the brand and that people wanna play
Mhm.
third-party games on it, and that they can kind of afford to fumble the bag a little more than Xbox can. Because you made that comment earlier. I think Xbox is held under greater scrutiny than they are because they're losing. And I think I think I get criticized sometimes for making excuses for Sony, but I'm not doing it because I'm on their side. I'm doing it because I think that they have a lot of bandwidth to fuck up because they've done a really good job of building their brand over 5 console generations and having the name PlayStation
Yeah.
mean something. And
Yeah, I mean,
that,
they screwed up with the PS3's launch. It was a disaster, but
yeah.
then Microsoft screwed up with the Xbox One launch. That was a disaster. So it's like
Mhm.
they both kind of had terrible, kind of stumbles out the gate, but I have no clue what this business event is gonna look like. I don't know if it's gonna be a press release. I don't know if it's gonna be a conference. Like, what's it gonna be? Is it gonna be like a developer direct style thing that people watch
I
and
don't
it's a
know.
live
I
stream?
I think Phil's gonna just, like, give a message. I think it'll be one of those, like, video messages, and he'll tweet it out, and it'll be like,
I
"An
don't
update from
know
Xbox,"
though,
kinda thing,
because if
you
they
know?
were planning something, like, seemingly all the stuff was ready for Hi-Fi Rush, like, there's those T-shirts that were found in the data mine, there's, like, new banners, like, "We're here" and stuff. Like, it
Yeah.
seems like it was maybe a bit consumer focused to show that
Maybe. Maybe.
these stuff are now gonna be announced as on other platforms and as maybe spinning it as an exciting thing.
You think this is why Jim Ryan left? He was like, "Oh my god, I talked all that shit during that legal case, and now they're gonna put all their games on PlayStation." Like, just covered in his eyes as he walks out. He's like, I don't wanna look
He
at
he
Phil."
he he should have just been like, "No, you're not allowed to publish on our platform. Sorry,
Absolutely
goodbye."
not. Awesome. Well, we will wrap it up there for today. If you guys want to write in and let us know what you think the future of Xbox looks like, do you think they're getting out of the console business? Do you think we're going to see them double down on services? Could you maybe see them doing something buck wild, like putting out a handheld? Like, what are we looking at here? Because I think it's interesting, right? Like as we
Mhm.
get further into this generation, there's a lot of conversation about, I think, specifically PlayStation and Xbox, and like how they will evolve from here, and if they will evolve from here. And despite the fact that they're both taking pretty different paths, it does seem like both companies are at a bit of a crossroads, interestingly enough. And it's been an interesting journey to watch, and one that I think is probably only going to get more complicated over the rest of this generation. So make sure you keep it tuned for for everything that happens on the story as it develops. And if you've got thoughts or opinions that you want to hear read on the air, make sure you come and write in all the ways that you can. And you can find all those and much more over at flipscreen.games. That's our website with links to all the places we are all over the web. If you want to go and check out our content, if you want to go and check out we're doing shorts now. We're on TikTok. We're on Reels. You want to go support us over there. That would be really great. Of course, check out our sister shows and all the cool content we got, going on these days. We've been making a lot of good stuff for you guys. You guys have been really supportive in responding to it. But if you haven't seen some of that new stuff, maybe if you're an audio listener and you're not checking out the video stuff, make sure you go give us a follow and keep up over there as well. We really greatly appreciate it. And I greatly appreciate you tuning into this week's episode of the Flip Screen Games podcast. How about you, Steve? Good work today, by the way. You're killing it.
It's been a good one. I love, talking gossip about, the demise of a platform that
Of
people
everything.
love. Yeah.
Physical games, dead. Platforms, dead. It's all dead.
Yeah.
Video
All very,
games are
very happy stuff.
over. All right, gang. Well, make sure you write into the show. Make sure you join the community. Make sure you get involved however you choose to do so. Thank you for tuning into another episode of the show. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.